Imu arrived on God Valley by possessing Saint Saturn, but there was something about this form that was different from Imu's past appearances in the story. When Imu in this form attacked rocks, he made a comment about Imu's attacks not actually damaging him. A similar comment was made by Roger's crew a few pages earlier, where after getting stabbed by Imu, they were mostly fine, but they also said that the damage felt interesting. These attacks are the complete opposite of how we've seen Imu's powers perk in previous scenes. When Sabo tried to rescue King Cobra in Pangaea Castle, Imu personally attacked the tool, but unlike on God Valley, these attacks hurt like heck. In this form, Imu's attacks not only killed Cobra, but also left Sabo wounded to a point where he was still in pain even after escaping from the Holy Land. Imu's attacks were also able to do this kind of serious damage when he possessed Kunko's body on Elbaf, where just one move from Imu was enough to take out Brogy's hand. So, why was Imu possessing Saturn's body on God Valley different? Why did his attacks no longer damage other characters when they've done this in all of Imu's other scenes? I think I have a pretty good answer for this question, but the thing I should start with is that Imu's abilities no longer doing any real damage was not the only special thing about this form he took on God Valley. Even when all of God Valley's strongest characters attacked him at once, Imu was completely unaffected. This was despite the characters who attacked Imu including Sepik, Roger and Garp, who are not just able to use Conqueror's coating, but all three of them have shown that their Conquerors is so strong that it can actually bypass Imu's special powers. This was shown when Roger and Garp's attacks were able to revert Sepik back to his human form, but Sepik himself also showed that his Conquerors was able to overpower Garling's regeneration. When all three of these characters attacked Imu at once, even with them being supported by 3 future Emperors, it did nothing to Imu. Just like Imu's attacks, however, this is also different to how Imu's powers have worked in the prior story. When Sabo attacked Imu at Marie Choice, Imu did not actually let the attack just hit him like at God Valley, but he decided to block it by literally jumping Sabo's fire. This was despite Sabo's attack being just a devil fruit power with no Conqueror's haki or haki of any kind. There's one more thing I need to mention about Imu's peculiar behavior on God Valley, which is just how passive he was on this island. Imu actually let other characters do all of his fighting for him during this event. Imu is absolutely obsessed with eliminating all Davy clan members, yet instead of hunting them down personally, he simply commands Sepik to kill them for him. Imu even personally gloats to Sepik about this, saying that Sepik is going to be personally hunting down his own family, while Imu is just going to stand by and watch. Then at the end of the incident, when Sepik is no longer under Imu's control, Imu also does not personally finish Sepik off, yet this is instead done by the God's Knights. But this is once again inconsistent with how Imu has acted in his other scenes in the story. Imu is actually not in the slightest against getting his own hands dirty. During the robbery, even though all the elders were also in the room, Imu took charge of the situation and personally assaulted both Sabo and Cobra on Elbaf. The only reason why Imu even came to the island is because he thought the God's Knights were taking too long, but instead of sending them reinforcements via the Abyss, Imu just decided to finish the Elbaf mission personally. But I think there is a very good reason why Imu behaved so differently on God Valley. I think this form Imu took by possessing Saturn was essentially the weakest form we've seen Imu take. Based on what the manga showed, this form seemingly works like a hologram. While possessing Saturn, Imu takes no damage, whether from Conqueror's haki or any other kind of ability, even if the attack is coming from some of the strongest characters in the story. But this very likely has nothing to do with who's stronger or weaker. What Imu is seemingly doing is the same thing Logia users were doing in the pre-time skip, where he's facing through everything that gets thrown at him. But this defense did not apparently come for free, where Imu's attacks also lost almost all of their power, as even nameless pirates were mostly fine after taking them. Even though in the previous arc, we saw that Imu is able to severely wound even the number 2 of the revolutionary army. It could even be that the only reason why these attacks slightly hurt Roger's crew, but did not hurt Sepik, is that Saturn was involved in the first scene. We also saw this when God Valley's strongest did their mega attack on Imu and Saturn, where Saturn seemed to actually take real damage from it, and could not get up for the rest of the incident. Before I continue with the video, I'll just ask anyone who's watched this far to subscribe to the channel, because it's still my plan to put out a lot more content than usual in the coming weeks. So, why did Imu choose to assume this form on God Valley? Saturn was not the only option Imu could have taken, where we for example know that Kunko was also on the island. If he had wanted to, Imu could have possessed her instead, which in many ways actually seems preferable to possessing Saturn. We know Imu can still perform Domi Reversi while in Kunko's body, but unlike with Saturn's body, Imu can still fight and attack other characters when possessing Kunko, meaning that he could have personally participated in hunting down the Davy clan, instead of just relying on Sebek. Since Imu clearly did not care about showing his true form on God Valley, it is also possible that he could have just personally come down on the island via a magic circle, in his true and strongest form. I think there is however a very good reason why Imu instead decided to possess Saturn. I believe that Imu did this because he was afraid. The God Valley incident was basically the gathering of all of the world government's strongest enemies. Pretty much all of the world's most dangerous pirates gathered here, but this gallery of rogues even included over half a dozen fighters who could code their attacks in Conqueror's Haki to a level where they could just run through characters like the God's Knights. Even if Imu is one of the strongest One Piece characters who's ever lived, but also, even if he were individually stronger than anyone on this island, a very consistent thing about Imu's character is that he is incredibly scared for his own life. Sebek points this out about Imu at God Valley, saying that he is absolutely terrified of things like Joy Boy or Davy D. Jones returning to the world. We also saw just how afraid Imu was of this at the end of the Egghead arc, where even though he was half a world away, in the safety of his castle, a single ghostly remnant of Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki was enough to leave Imu screaming and shaking. It's also possible that Imu through Kunko admitted on Elbaf that his greatest fear is in fact Sun God Nika, but I don't think Imu is only afraid of these figures from the Void Century, but more so that fear is simply a core trait of his character. The entire One Piece story from Imu's perspective is him desperately trying to wipe out any record of his past enemies and to prepare for the final war. Imu is clearly obsessed with the prophecy of this coming conflict, as everything from the government trying to conquer nations like Elbaf, to them funding Vegapunk's research, to them trying to find ancient weapons, is very likely just military build-up for the final war, where Imu is doing everything in his power to survive. None of these are really the actions of someone who actually feels secure in their power. I also do not think it would really make sense for Imu to be so consistently afraid if he at the same time was someone who could just breeze through even the strongest attack we've ever seen in the story. I think what is far more likely is that Imu knew that God Valley was full of these monsters, and that for his own safety, he decided to use this glamour form by possessing Saturn, where he could still use Domi Reversi on Sebek, while also avoiding getting personally harmed. In a way, if my interpretation is correct, Imu would actually remind me a lot of another character in the story, which is Charlotte Cracker. Just like Imu, Cracker was someone who was very much defined by fear, where he was so afraid of getting hurt that he spent most of his time inside his biscuit soldiers. This was to a point that the Marines did not even know Cracker's real face, and had actually placed an image of one of these soldiers on his bounty poster. Someone like Rogue also seemingly didn't manage to penetrate Cracker's armor when fighting him, where he might have felt something similar to what all these characters felt on God Valley, that he was fighting some invulnerable monster, but ultimately Cracker was just another dude, and I think Imu is almost guaranteed to be the same. I've probably said this in some of my other videos, but with One Piece, there's pretty much always a guy behind the wizard that's pulling all of the levers. Still, I also think that Imu's fear is something that may be completely justifiable, where the things he's afraid of are very much real threats to his power. If you're interested, you can click here to watch a video about exactly this, and why I think that one of Imu's greatest enemies actually survived the Void Century and is still alive in the current story. Thank you to all my members for their loot. There's still plenty of days before Christmas, and I'll really try to upload as much content as I possibly can in this time. I really appreciate everyone who watched this all the way to the end.